Subscribe to The Honest Critique for current affairs, movie, book, and product reviews. Also, make sure you press the bell icon to get notified whenever we upload a new video. The views, information, or opinions expressed during the video series are solely those of the individuals and do not necessarily represent those of The Honest Critique and its employees. The following video contains strong language which may be offensive to some viewers. Viewer discretion advised.
Former Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is set to make a comeback as the final vote count for the Knesset elections gave him and his allies a clear majority of 65 seats in the parliament. With 99% of the votes being counted, Netanyahu's Likud party has earned 32 of the 120 Knesset seats. There was a situation of a political deadlock with 5 elections in the last 4 years after Benjamin Netanyahu was charged with corruption in his election. The coalition partner for Benjamin Netanyahu are the religious right bloc, including his party Likud, far-right religious Zionism, United Torah Judaism, and Shas. What will be the impact of this rightward shift in Israeli politics and the foreign policy of the country? To discuss these and much more, I'm honored to be joined by Amotz Asa-El, best-selling Israeli author, former executive editor of the Jerusalem Post, and a fellow at the Hartman Institute. Sir, thank you so much for taking the time and speaking to us today. Firstly, I want to start by understanding the rise of Benjamin Netanyahu in his election, especially the personality he is. And with 12 years as Prime Minister, and now coming back after he has corruption charges against him, I can understand his hunger to stay in power. But why will he agree to a coalition with Itamar Ben-Gvir and Bezalel Smotrich?
First of all, he feels closer to them than he does to the opposition. And it's not so much a matter of abstract positions, but it's rather a matter of personal inclinations. In other words, he understands that these far-right parties' constituents are happier with him than the opposition, which has waged personal war on him in the wake of his indictments and in the wake of his attack on the judiciary. All the parties that oppose Netanyahu feel that he's threatening the democratic underpinnings of Israel because he is doubting the judicial system's integrity and impartiality. And on this, the parties to his right are with him. This is what makes him bring them into his coalition rather than any other parties that he's leaving outside it.
One of the things that have been the talk of election season is the judicial reforms. And there is a sense of perpetual fear that his coalition might override the judiciary to avoid getting indicted on the corruption charges. And will the ultra-orthodox parties have any impact on Netanyahu's foreign policies?
Judiciary, nobody knows what Netanyahu's plans are. There is speculation and there is suspicion, but there is no information. There are sporadic pronouncements from people around him saying different things, never on behalf of his party or let alone on behalf of himself. Some of the ideas they've touted included the abolition of the breach of trust felony from the law book, the breach of trust that is currently illegal for politicians. The argument for this abolition is that breach of trust is impossible to define and is in effect left for the courts to define according to each and every individual case and its details. So that, they say, leaves so much leeway for the legal system and leaves the politicians so vulnerable that the people proposing this bill say that it needs to be erased from the books of law or from the legal codex. And these are some of the allegations that Netanyahu faces. He's never said that with his own mouth, but there is reason to suspect that those who did say this from within his party wouldn't have done that without at least his nod or even his instruction. That's one thing. Another thing that's being touted is much less clearly contentious, and it's about a law that would enable the Israeli parliament, the Knesset, to override a resolution by the Supreme Court to annul legislation that the court found to be unconstitutional. In other words, if the court makes such a definition about a bill that the Knesset passed, and then the Knesset passes by, according to this proposal, by a certain majority, a law that overrules the Supreme Court's ruling, then the Knesset will have overruled the Supreme Court. This, the people who oppose this bill say, would totally compromise the very principle of the separation of powers. And Netanyahu himself has said nothing on this front throughout his legal entanglements. What he did do repeatedly and vocally is attack the judiciary itself, suggesting that it was partial when it came to him, and in fact that it conspired against him together with the media and the police and the prosecution. And this, of course, his opponents find preposterous. He offers no evidence, and the whole thing sounds completely far-fetched. It's inconceivable that this actually happened. What's more, that some of the people he alleges in making this suggestion are people that he himself appointed and were representatives of the very constituencies that are identified with him. So the whole allegation, as he makes it, is both preposterous factually and also very dangerous democratically. This is what's happening, what has happened until this victory of his. Now that he's won, the big question is what he will do, and nobody knows that. That's on the legal front. Now you ask rightly, what will his universally religious coalition partners do, or to what extent will they impact his foreign policy? Some of them have no interest in following. All the ultra-orthodox parties don't interfere in that. They don't want the foreign ministry. This is not where their agendas lie, and they will play no, in all likelihood, will play no role in his diplomatic activity. The religious Zionism party is deeply interested in all this. They represent the most right-wing part of the Israeli population in terms of what to do with the West Bank. They want the West Bank annexed. They make that plain and vocally so, and they are also demanding the defense portfolio, that their party leader will be the defense minister. There is no indication for now that Netanyahu wants to heed this request, but if he does, then the defense minister in Israel is anywhere, by definition, is in the thick of the country's diplomatic stewardship. So we have to wait and see whether he actually appoints one of their people to the defense ministry. We don't know.
That brings me to the policies by Yair Lapid, and the recent one being the permanent Israel-Lebanon maritime boundary agreement. The ultra-orthodox parties aren't very happy with the policy and are opposing it. What's the immediate foreign policy change you think will Netanyahu bring to the table?
We think that foreign affairs, as long as it's up to Israel, will now be relegated to the back burner. Netanyahu is going to be up to his neck with domestic affairs. And the outside world is also right now distant from the Middle East politically. Everybody is busy with two things, with the war in Ukraine and with the rivalry between China and the West. And I think your country too, one way or another. And Netanyahu will be happy with this background because it's better for him in terms of his agenda that Israel right now be relatively forgotten by the international community. And there is a good reason to believe that this is where we're headed now for a while. Having said this, I think there will be a difference of nuance in his attitude towards the Ukraine war when compared with Lapid. Lapid was very clear in his siding with Ukraine. And in this, he slightly parted with the Israeli instinct and the conduct by a succession of governments in recent years, which was to remain neutral on all conflicts between the superpowers, unless, of course, America itself is at stake. That goes without saying that Israel is with America in anything, anywhere. But in the Ukrainian conflict, to the extent that it's directly between the Ukrainians and the Russians, the Israeli instinct is to remain above the fray because Russia is a superpower. Ukraine is also a very powerful country, and there are sizable Jewish communities on both sides of this war, which is a situation that Israel never faced in its history, in its 70 years or 70 something years history. We never faced such a war. That it happened in the Cold War, that there were Jews on both sides of the Iron Curtain, but there was no hot war, like say Vietnam or Korea. There were no Jews over there. Now you have sizable Jewish communities on both sides of this war, and the Israeli interest is to look after their affairs and not to appear in either of those countries as if we side fully with the enemy. That's the basic Israeli attitude, which Lapid also maintained in the sense that Israel did not join the boycott against Russia alone among Western countries. And I don't know if India wants to consider itself part of the West, but India also didn't effectively join, I believe, the sanctions. But for Israel not to join the sanctions was a much more unorthodox move because of Israel's natural location in the geopolitical system behind the United States. Israel, despite that, did not join the sanctions. And Israel is not selling Ukraine weapons that it really is demanding on a daily basis and very loudly, and sometimes even angrily. So in all this, Lapid maintained the Israeli neutrality, but in terms of his pronouncements, he was very, very outspoken in his condemnation of Russia. And I think Netanyahu will stop short of that. Among other reasons, because he really is friends with Putin. Obviously, this friendship precedes the war, and I am unaware that they met. They had a chance to meet since the war's eruption. So Netanyahu will remain low-key on that front, but he's not going to be as vocal as Lapid was in terms of the Ukraine war.
So what do you think will be Netanyahu's doctrine in front? And will there be any action on Iran?
He won't act on Iran. In other words, he won't wage an attack on Iran. Everything that has been reportedly happening along the years in terms of Israel reportedly sabotaging Iran's nuclear program, there's no reason to believe that will not continue. And in terms of Israel obstructing Iran's military buildup in Syria, there's no reason to believe that will not continue. All this has become part of the routine here. But you're asking about an Israeli direct military attack in Iran. And I don't see that happening now for the prosaic reason that everyone is waiting to see what evolves out of the grassroots unrest that is happening right now in Iran. No doubt that from anyone's viewpoint, the best solution for all the troublemaking that is associated with Iran is that Iran changed from within. And maybe that is happening now, and I don't see him trying to barge into the landscape just when something is evidently happening there.
Now, moving to the campaign strategies of the parties, Yair Lapid ran a campaign targeting the middle class with the issues like higher cost of living. What worked for the Israeli voters this time? We have seen no mention of the Palestine, the two-state solution, and even Iran in this election. What were the core issues, and how was the electorate divided among the political parties?
First of all, set aside the campaign, the electorate, the constituencies. Lapid's is clearly the upper middle class and the better off. These are his instinctive following, and it's easy to prove by regional voting patterns. And Likud's aim towards the lower middle class and the working class and the more religiously traditional electorates. In terms of the campaigns, it all ended up being largely about identities rather than policies. And this, I think, is a plague that is now affecting many countries around the world. That is clearly what is happening in the United States, for instance. That is very possibly what happened, or arguably what happened in Britain with Brexit. That is very arguably what has just happened in Italy with the rise of the far right over there. There is an identity crisis that is being exploited by new political forces at the expense of the traditional historical parties in Israel. For instance, the Labour Party that established Israel and led it for decades has nearly vanished in this election. And it is the result of an ongoing steady erosion. Historically speaking, this is not about programs and it's not about campaigns. It's something deeper. So I think this is what was at play here now. And in terms of the future, a great deal will hinge on Netanyahu's personal fate in the corruption charges that he faces. And regardless of that, suppose even that he emerges from that fully exonerated and with all of his charges dropped, and he's 70 free. So even in the best case scenario, from his point of view and from his party's point of view, there is maybe another half decade of him sticking around. Then someone else will need to succeed him. And by then, I think that Israeli society will be ripe for a new alternative to Likud that has been Israel's political hegemon now for nearly a quarter century.
Benjamin Netanyahu came up with his autobiography recently, titled Bibi. It's kind of interesting for a serving politician to come up with an autobiography of this scale. Do you think he knew that it was his last election, considering his age to be in early 70s?
I doubt it. Clearly he wants, not clearly, but possibly he will be thinking of this term in office as a legacy term. And who knows what that might mean to him and what it might make him do. The way things currently seem, he's going to be initially up to his shoulders with his legal situation and to dedicate to that most of his time, and also to subordinate all of his other activities to this one personal concern.
Thank you so much, sir, for taking out your time and speaking to us. It was an absolute pleasure hosting you for this interview.
Thank you, my pleasure.